So I like to tell people that, money's important, and yes, we should shoot for all these goals that money can help us get to, but don't ever lose sight at the end of the day that the three things that really matter in life are those three things. So make sure you're carving out enough time in your week to be depositing your investments in those areas of your life. Are you spending enough time with the people you care about? Are you doing things with your work or with your free time that you feel, are making you a better person, the world a better place? And then are you investing in your health?
This is Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.
Welcome back, everybody, to another issue of Little by Little. I'm joined today with Adam Taggart, the founder of Thoughtful Money. Adam, thanks for coming on, buddy. I really appreciate it very much. I'm an admirer of your work, have been for a while. And I wanted to have you on today and talk about, what got you here. But thanks for coming, for sure.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed meeting you at, I think it was VRIC, the Vancouver conference earlier this year, and I hope our paths cross live again soon.
Yeah, they will. I hope. I just did an interview with Jay Martin yesterday. I'm looking forward to going back up there again this year. I think it's the 19th and 20th. And as I told him, there are only two conferences predominantly anyway, unless one pops up that I happen to go to. But typically there's only two that I go to and speak at. And it's Jay's conference and it's Rick Rule's conference down here in Boca, which is pretty much my backyard. So that one's easy. Of course, flying from Southern Florida to Vancouver is always an interesting experience. Last year when I went, a couple of layovers, missed it. I'm speaking the next morning at 8 a.m. I'm in Seattle. The flight is delayed 5 hours. At least there was football. I ended up probably having one too many beers in the bar watching football, but only to find out that the flight was canceled and had to drive to Vancouver in the middle of the night, in the middle of a snowstorm. So flying from Southern Florida to Vancouver is kind of a pain in the rear, but it's worth it. It's one of the best conferences.
It shows how much you value the conference to be able to fight through all that. Well, Jay, it looks like we're going to see each other in person twice next year then, because I'll see you back at BRIC, and I'm going to be at Rick's conference in Boca in the summer.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to it. And if you have golf clubs and you like to golf, bring them down. I'll play around with you in Boca next year.
Thanks. If you want to win, that I'll happily do that. But I'd probably much rather play football with your wife.
Yeah, it's perfect. No, just teasing. Anyways, listen. In researching your background, it's remarkable. Your background, very fascinating. Working as an investment banker on Wall Street, to leading marketing for North America at Yahoo Finance. Now that's a cool story in and of itself. And now you're the founder of Thoughtful Money. And kind of one of the things that resonated with me is that your career seemed to constantly focus on helping everyday investors make better financial decisions, including yourself. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are, how you got here, Adam, and also a little bit about Thoughtful Money. I think that would be a good way to start.
Sure. I'll try to give you the shortest version I can. At a high level too, it's one of those stories that it's a path I probably never could have planned for myself, but by the time I got to the end of it, every sort of link in the chain made sense looking retroactively. So I grew up, my parents got divorced when I was very young. My mother got primary custody of us. And growing up with her, she did not have any financial education. She was a single mom. Her parents had passed away when I was very young. So she didn't really have much of a support structure or anyone to really mentor her. And I saw how money was a constant stress for her. And because she didn't really have a financial education, she made an awful lot of bad decisions. And as things got more and more dire, her choices became more and more desperate. Each one the next one she was hoping would be the winning lottery ticket, if you will. And it really just imprinted on me how the lack of having a foundation in how money works and how to build wealth, certainly wasn't common to my mom. Lots of the majority of people, as I began to mature, realized the majority of people have a deficiency in their financial education. And it's just amazing. I started looking at adults and families that were in better shape, and I began realizing that they just sort of understood more about how investing worked or business worked or whatnot. And because my mom didn't have that background, she just couldn't make good choices. And so anyways, it really imprinted upon me the difference that a financial education can make and the advantage that it can lend. Now, obviously, I wanted to do everything I could to help her. And what was interesting is as I went through schooling, I went to high school, I then went to an Ivy League undergrad. I eventually went to Stanford to get my MBA. Nowhere in that process was I given a single class on how money works, or even just the practical aspects of dealing with the big monetary decisions in our life, how to take out a mortgage, things like that, right? It's just kind of assumed that you're going to sort of pick all this stuff up along the way. But unless you've got a mentor who is teaching this to you, who already knows it, you're just kind of figuring it all out on the fly. And it's so funny because, our education system as a culture, we rightly value education. And when you ask somebody, well, why do you value education? The answer is well, because it'll help you get ahead in life, right? You'll be better off if you're educated than if you're not. Okay, well, what do you mean by better off? Well, most people mean I'll be financially ahead. I'll be able to afford more of the things I want to have in life. And it's so funny that if that is the main reason why we go to school, schools completely fail us on delivering on that, right? So anyways, I then, when I graduated from undergrad, I went to work on Wall Street. I won't get into it too much, but the plan was for me to always be a doctor. I'm from a family of doctors and healthcare providers. And at the last moment, I decided not to go to medical school. So I had to do something. I went onto Wall Street. It was a little bit of a square peg there. Definitely not the right cultural fit for me, but it did two things for me. It gave me, a good grounding in how the financial system works. And secondly, it really showed me that Wall Street exists to serve its own interests. In terms of its priorities, the client is like last. It's like a distant last on the list, right? So, I began realizing, okay, look, our education system doesn't educate us well when it comes to money. And the system is kind of rigged against us, right? So, again, thinking back to the plight of my mom and the tens of millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans that are, in a similar position as she was, I wanted to try to make some sort of difference in that world. And so I didn't want to stay on Wall Street. I ejected after my analyst program was over, went to get my MBA at Stanford. And while I was there, by the way, while I was there, I still didn't get any practical classes on how to build wealth there. But when I graduated, the internet revolution was happening. And so that's where I went to a startup briefly, but then ended up at Yahoo. I was the head of marketing for Yahoo Finance in my initial role there, and really got to understand how the internet was this wonderful new platform that allowed for the delivery of information at a very cheap, if not free, level to the masses. And that really fascinated me. So, at the end of my time on Wall Street, I totally knew I didn't want to stay there, but I needed an escape route. So that's where I went and got my MBA at Stanford. Mind you, too, while I was there, I still didn't get any practical classes in how to manage money. But when I graduated from Stanford, that's when the internet revolution happened. And it was, relatively easy to get into that burgeoning new space. I worked for a startup for a little bit and then went to work at Yahoo. I was the head of marketing for Yahoo Finance there. And that really opened my eyes to the advantage the internet offered to be able to deliver useful content at scale to the public at little to potentially no cost.
What year was that when you were at Yahoo, Adam? What year? Was this at the very beginning of the internet?
I wish it were. If it were, I would probably be filming this from my private island. No, I joined Yahoo in 2001, which, funny story I'll go into a different interview with you, but I joined on their first day of layoffs in the company's history. It was a really, really strange time to join the company. It was sort of right when the super easy money ended and the harder money came on in. But it was a great education of how to run and not run a business. But for me, in terms of understanding digital media as a platform to help educate people, I mean, it was a masterclass. And so by the end of my time there, I'd risen up, as you said, to the vice president of marketing for North America. And I really just said, if I can get one more person to use Yahoo Mail or play, fantasy sports on their phone, that's just not making the kind of difference I want to make in the world. I really wanted to get out there and try to make my mark and helping advance this cause of developing public financial literacy. And so I ended up leaving the company and starting a digital platform that began to do a lot of this financial education. That was Peak Prosperity, and I believe you're familiar with that company, Andy. And then ran that for about 10 years, co-ran that with a business partner for about 10 years. And then realized, we talked a lot about resilience at Peak Prosperity, and there's a whole spectrum of it. We had what we called sort of the 8 forms of capital that we thought, if you really want to build wealth, these are the 8 ways to really do it. Financial capital was one of those ways. It's very important, don't get me wrong, but it's not the whole picture, right? The goal in life isn't to die atop a pile of money, right? The goal in life is to have a rich life, right? The problem I realized is that it was really hard to get people to focus on the other 7 forms of wealth until I had scratched the itch that they had of, okay, but what do I do with my money, right? So then I ended up creating a financial media company just around that. That was called Wealthion, and great company. I had the vision, did the entire thing, but I didn't own the platform. And as you know, about a year ago, I left that to go truly independent, and that's where I founded Thoughtful Money. And again, what I do there is I try to bring in the smartest minds and money in the markets, help people understand what these experts are thinking, so let them crawl in their brain, let them tap into their expertise, and then try to make that information as actionable as possible for them. Because at the end of the day, my goal is very simple. It's to help improve people's odds of funding their life's goals. And to do that, you have to be better informed so you can make more informed decisions. And then you need to actually put that information into practice in your life. And wherever possible, the platform connects people with solutions that can hopefully help them do that. That's about as short as I can tell the journey.
No, man, dude, I love that. What you said, it resonates with me particularly, I guess it in a strong manner. Nothing's changed my life, Adam, like YouTube has. In the last 4 years, it's changed my life in such a material way, it's hard for me to justify and explain to people. It's hard for me to justify it in my own reasoning, in my own brain. And what you exemplify is what I try and exemplify myself, what I try and achieve myself. And to me, you are someone who is proof positive that you can run a business and want to be successful and have a business that you can be proud of, your family can be proud of, and at the same time, do right by people, have good intentions. And for some reason, a lot of people, at least in this industry, seem to think that if you are trying to educate people, at least from my side of the table, as I own a precious metals company, and yet it be something that's very important to me as well, financial literacy, and trying to explain what's really happening to people, understanding that in my opinion, journalistic integrity is dead in the mainstream, in the legacy media, and going out of my way, just like you do, to bring this information to the public. Yet it's very obvious to me that your intentions are pure. You left a job, that you did love on Wall Street that was paying you well. You go into Yahoo Finance as a marketer, and at the very top of it, you decide to move into something this way, a capitalistic endeavor, yet your entire motivation is to help people and to do right by people. And I, for one, really, really respect that. It's something I try to do as well. And
I think do well, by the way.
Well, thank you. I try really hard. It didn't come easy for me. I outwork people, and I spend all day reading and researching. And running a company and doing podcasts. And I think you only get so many chances in life to make your mark. And I don't know what drives me to do this. My company has been very successful by the grace of God. We've done over 10 billion in sales, never had a customer complaint. I'm very proud of the achievements we've made. I don't need to put myself out there the way that I do, but I have great joy in it. And it's deep. It's deep enough in my psyche where I can't even really explain why I do it. Put myself out there, and you know what I mean by putting yourself out there. You are out there, and it's something that I just feel very strongly about. And it's really nice to hear someone like you who exemplifies success, showing that intentions can be pure and still run a good business at the same time. One of the things that you've been very outspoken about, and our common friend Robert Kiyosaki and I talk about this all the time, is the need for practical financial education. As you were just saying, financial literacy. Like for example, the rule of 70 seconds. How many people really understand basic interest rates and laws of compounding, things that should be drilled into our head from an early age, that let the laws of compounding work for you rather than against you? I often tell the story, people think it has to be the compounding of interest, and that's a big one, right? But I often talk about the promise I made to my father when I was 19 years old when we started our company, on a wing and a prayer. My dad's middle name is Miles. The gentleman who lent us $60,000 in 1989 in a one-room office the size of a closet before the internet, his middle name was Franklin. And he said to me, look, Andy, you're not going to make the same mistakes I made as a younger man. You're going to buy something every 2 weeks. I don't care if it's an ounce of silver or a tenth of an ounce of gold, whatever it is. That is your form of forced savings. And if you deviate from that, I'll fire you. That gift that my father gave me, even though it was a commandment of sorts, was the best gift anyone's ever given me. It taught me the laws of compounding. In this case, the compounding of time. And I have never missed a transaction. I've never missed a 2-week period. You won't fire me anymore. But I've honored my word, Adam. And for 35 years this February, I've purchased something every 2 weeks. And it's just like anything. It's like trying to become better at athletics. It's like trying to work out. It's as Robert says, paying yourself first to get out of the rat race, the concept of his board game. Financial literacy is something that's huge. And I learned that firsthand. And, when what I've grown to understand the power of compounding, it truly should be one of the wonders of the world. And most people grow up without this basic understanding of things like the compounding of interest or the compounding of time or the concept of financial literacy. And I know it's a big deal to you. It's a big deal to Robert. And it's very significant to me because I learned it practically. No one gave me anything except one rule, and that is save and pay yourself first. And I guess if we can talk to ourselves when we're 20 years old and say, listen, man, you're going to be 54 someday real soon. And there are things you're going to want to do. You're going to have 3 kids. You're going to have college expenses. You better start paying yourself first. And I love that this has been something that's very, that you're very passionate about. So I'm going to ask you this kind of a softball question here. And,
sure.
And if you had an opportunity, and I asked this question to Robert when I did an interview with him not too long ago too, similar question. And the question is, if you had the opportunity to create a single high school course on financial literacy, what topics and essential life skills would you prioritize to prepare students for financial independence and resilience?
Okay. So you were kind enough to provide me with some of the questions you were going to ask me beforehand. So I've actually given this a little bit of thought. So first off, I love the question because I love the idea, right? I mean, I think that this should be essentially the first course on the high school curriculum rather than something we're dreaming about shoehorning in at some point, some theoretical point in the future. But first, what I would do is I would make it practical. So this is not, don't make it about, economic theory. Don't let the kids get lost or turned off because it's super mathy, right? I think when people try to do this to younger kids, they start there. They start sort of from the economic textbook, and it doesn't emotionally engage the kids, and the kids check out early on, and then you're just trying to push information to a mind that's not open to receiving it. So I think you got to make it practical. You got to make it fun. don't make it just about numbers. Make it about the life goals that the kids are excited about, right? What do you want to do, right? You probably want to own a car at some point in time, right? At some point, you're going to want to own a home, right? So, okay, well, let's talk about those things, right? Like, how much do they cost? How much would you need to save, depending upon when you want to be able to own that car or when you want to be able to buy a house? How many years are we talking about of saving X to get to your goal is it going to take? And let the kids begin to see that sort of time, the relationship between time and money. And then talk about, okay, well, so you would need to, save X a month for X number of months or years to get to your goal. All right, well, if you're saving X, well, how much do you need to be making, right? What's the why you need to be making that after all your expenses will be X? And start to help them see the relationship between work, profit, work expenses, profit, saving, and then the time to hit your goals, right? Again, like if you're going to teach them, if we're actually going to teach them stuff, make it really practical. Like, okay, so let's say you want to buy that house. Great. You're roughly going to need to make X for this amount of time to buy a house of this amount. What's the house purchasing process like? I'm guessing you've heard of the term mortgage. Do you know what that is? Right? Do you know that a mortgage comes with what is a mortgage rate? Right? Do you know that part of that is tax deductible? Just all these things. How do you go about applying for a mortgage? Right? Maybe do a little mock mortgage application in the classroom. Have a mortgage broker come in and sit down and walk the kids through the mock application process. I mean, that would be super useful because that's for most people. That's going to be the biggest financial decision they ever make. Right? And yet we give them zero visibility into the process. Up until the point that life forces them to go through it. And then, most kids are going to end up having to deal with debt in some way, shape, or form, right? So, teach them about the benefits and the ills of debt, especially non-productive debt. Teach them about adverse compounding, right? So, we'll teach them in a moment about the exciting parts about compounding when it's a wind at your back. But first, let's tell them about how it can be an anchor around your neck, right? If you get into an auto loan that's too big, or you put too much on your credit cards, right? And that $20 pizza, by the time you paid it off, is a $326 pizza, right? So really, help them understand all of that. Then get to the fun part, right? Like, hey, money can be really fun in addition to the essentials that you're going to want, like transportation or shelter, right? It can be really fun. It can pay for ski trips. It can pay for a vacation home somewhere. Let the kids dream and then say, okay, great. Let's come up with an investing plan to help you get there. And then you can start talking to them about the different types of returns that different asset classes offer. And then, most importantly, to your point, show them the timeline about how, hey, look, yeah, if you have to show up at the end of the day with a pile of cash, your dream house is going to cost you all this money. But if you follow the Andy Schectman rule and you start paying yourself a little bit now, look how much less you need to put away over time to get to where you want to go. If you start early, if you start paying yourself first, if you start applying a lot of these basics about sound financial management. So, I think that's the way to go after it. And I think the one other idea that I would have there is I would start before high school. I would start in elementary school. And I don't know if your kids did this, but mine, at one point, they had a kind of like it was a great little exercise. It was teaching them about the responsibilities of becoming a parent, right? And they give you a flour baby, which is basically like it's a little baby doll. You fill it with flour.
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, you have to take care of it with another classmate.
Actually,
for
the ones that my kids had were actually, they had a computer chip inside of them, and they would know if you didn't do what you were supposed to. They would know if little baby Johnny peed himself and you didn't change its diaper, and they would know if little Johnny was starving. And so they actually would go back to school and they would download, little Johnny probably didn't make it through the night, Lola. So yeah, I know exactly.
Which I think it's a fantastic program, right? So why don't we do the same thing on the money side? And kind of the idea I have, and it's a squishy idea, so I'm sure your viewers here can improve upon it, but the sort of thinking is like, when they're young, really young, like first grade, second grade, start talking to them about the basics of money. Don't make it too complicated. But give every kid $1,000. And this is a fictional $1,000, right? And it's theirs to quote unquote manage. But in the first year or two, you're just watching. The teacher will say, look, we're putting this in something called the stock market. And every morning we're going to look at to see what the stock market did, right? And you'll be able to see what happens to your $1,000 over the course of this year. Maybe different classes are slightly different invested, and the classes are, somewhat competing against each other just to keep the kids' interest. But it's really just to let them get exposure to this thing called money and the markets and investing. As they go over, go into higher grades through elementary school, let the kids start having a little bit more agency in how their $1,000 is managed. Maybe even invite their parents in. It's something they can discuss at home at the dinner table. And, there can be some benefit by, graduating at the end of elementary school. Whoever makes the most money, gets a check for whatever they saved up for, right? But something like that. But at the end of elementary school, that $1,000, that fictional $1,000 is replaced with actual $1,000. And then over the next, middle school through high school, you are managing that money, and whatever is left over or whatever is in there by your senior year, right, graduation, and hopefully at this point it's thousands of dollars, maybe even a little more, that's real money that can either then be applied to your higher education, right? So if you go to trade school, if you go to college, whatever, that can be used towards your tuition, right? And if not, if you decide to just go out and start working in the real world right away, it's not a great idea, I think, to give money to an 18-year-old who their prefrontal cortex isn't completely solidified yet. But say, look, this is still there. You can still manage it. And by the time you hit some age or milestone, whether it's, you're 25, you're getting married, you're buying a house, whatever, you now have access to this money. And I guarantee you, Andy, given $1,000 to, every middle schooler like this, the benefits that we would reap as a society financially, in terms of, better financial decisions of our populace, a better educated populace, people who have to be less reliant on going into debt, that money would be a drop in the bucket compared to the gargantuan amounts of money that we currently waste in big government systems like the Department of Education.
That's genius, man. I mean, you talk about the amount of money that's wasted. I won't even go into it. I come from Minnesota, and I watch them wasted in many creative ways. But that's genius. You talk about investing in America. That is how you do it. You teach kids financial literacy, how to manage money, the concept of interest rates, the concept of risk, the concept of assets, the concepts of being an adult. And it's actually, I've never heard that idea, and it's genius as far as I'm concerned. When you talk about the way that we throw money around right now, we're creating $100,000 of debt per second in this country, most of it for stupid reasons. This is something that would keep kids focused. And you could even say, if you drop out of school early, you don't get it, goes to the school district or whatever it may be. Hey, man, I think you're onto something. I think that is really, really cool and a great idea. And if only more kids learned, and I agree, it should start right away, understanding the concept of money, the concept of savings, the concept of being on the right side of compounding of time and interest. It's genius. I love the idea. You have my vote.
Well, thanks, Andy. And as you know, I mean, a big part of becoming a successful investor is learning from the school of hard knocks and making a lot of mistakes. So let the kids learn those mistakes early on when the implications of them are low, so that by the time they're getting released into the world, they have all the right experience, or at least, a lot more experience than they would otherwise.
As an aside, Adam, I live in a golf community where there's some very successful people, and even some of these people, I wonder how they got to where they are, because they're incredibly well read. They just totally read the wrong stuff, and their ideas on investing, on savings, on what money is, baffles me sometimes, and the inordinate amount of risk that they take in regards to the upside. Certainly not asymmetrical and backwards to my thinking. That's for another day. But I think that would be the greatest thing we could do to the younger generation, is to focus more on things that are practical and that are important to be a contributing member of society. That's cool. I'm glad I asked you that question. So Adam, I know you've spoken a lot about the importance of health, of the resilience of not just financial health, but health in general, physical health.
Sure.
And this is how I came across Peak Prosperity, you and Chris Martenson. And I'll never forget it. It was December, maybe 2020, November 2019. And I had met Chris at a conference passingly one time. I think we ate at a dinner on a giant table with folks from Agora and other groups. And he was at the table. He probably wouldn't know me from Adam at that point, but I start watching him talk about what was coming. That in a few months, people will be wearing a mask and you'll get a stink eye if you don't wear one. And I remember saying this to people and to my wife, and everyone thought it was crazy. And then my wife started to watch, and we watch it every single night. It changed my life and allowed my business to thrive in a way that I would not have done otherwise. Because after watching Chris for a couple of weeks, I went to my operations and I said, this is real. And this is, I'm going to Costco and loading up on stuff. People are looking at me like I'm nuts because it really hadn't taken hold yet. And I went to my operations and I said, I want you to go as deep into our line of credit as possible. I want you to empty the savings account, all of it. And I want you to buy everything you can out as far as you can. I don't care if you're going 6 months out, you buy it now. And I don't know what motivated me to do that. It could have been a disastrous experience, although we did hedge everything. The point I'm getting at is that he alerted me, your firm alerted me to what was coming. And although I didn't have any idea what really was coming, it scared me enough to understand that this would create massive supply chain distortions. And for that, I took a gamble, and it paved the way for, at that point, the most successful year I'd ever had in business. And I thank you and Chris for having the courage to do what you did, to alert the people the way that you did. And I don't mean to digress. It's just I wanted to at least say that because it really did change things for me. In fact, I would argue that the pandemic changed my life in ways that I can't really explain, starting with my journey on YouTube. And I owe a lot of that, honestly, to your firm and to the message that Chris was giving every single night. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you for that, because in a very oddball way, it really shaped the trajectory of my company for the last several years.
Well, thank you. That's very humbling to hear. And I will say, I hope you get a chance to say that directly to Chris. Specifically, what you're talking about was largely due to his background in his PhD in cell pathology, and I think that gave him the ability to look forward and say, "Hey, this thing that we're seeing here in China has a high degree of getting out and changing the world in the way that it actually did." So I was, definitely involved in the operations and helping get the message out there, but it really was Chris's foresight. So
it was his foresight, but you were his partner. And for what it's worth, I want to say thank you, because it did alter in the most positive of ways. I almost feel guilty for saying that as awful as it was probably the best thing that ever happened to my company. It changed the course of the way that I do business. And if I wouldn't have done what I did because of his warning, because of you allowing that warning to get out there with him, that would have been a very different path for me. So anyways, I digress. I just wanted to take that moment to say thank you. There are people who appreciate those things and never get the chance to say it. I wanted to say it.
Well, thank you. That's the best feedback an entrepreneur can ever hear. So thank you.
Yeah,
I just wish it wasn't something so terrible that was the cause of it all.
It was terrible, but as crazy as it sounds, and I almost feel guilty saying this, there are opportunities in everything. Even if it's terrible, you don't have to just survive. There are ways that you can thrive and do it in a positive way. Try to turn things upside down, make lemonade from lemons. Anyways, so with that being said, can you share how you think physical and mental well-being contribute to someone's overall financial stability? And that's, it's very important. Obviously, wealth without health is nothing. Are there any specific health practices you'd recommend for people aiming to thrive in both life and finances? I think I remember seeing you doing a bunch of pull-ups in your basement, if I'm not mistaken. But, at least I know that, that us old guys can still work out and stay in good shape and work hard to get the message out.
Thank you. And actually, that is, I do share, periodically little vignettes of my my health regime, and I do it mostly for that reason, to hopefully inspire people to say, hey, look, if this 53-year-old desk jockey can get out there and do this, then maybe I can too. But let me answer your question by something. If any of my regular viewers are watching this video, they'll have heard me say this often. I think I said earlier, the goal in life is not to die atop a pile of cash, right? Money is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. And if you go onto YouTube, which I know you're very steeped in, Andy, and you type in centenarian advice, a centenarian is somebody who's lived to be 100 years or older. They have a lot of videos there where people sit down with people that are over 100 and say, okay, you've done life. Like, what do we need to know about it? What matters, right? And their answers are pretty much a variation of the following three things. Number one is always quality relationships. So at the end of the day, humans are social creatures. We're tribal animals. We really, we source our happiness in large part through our relationships and how meaningful they are to us. So that's point number one. You don't need to have a lot of them necessarily, a lot of the relationships, but you need to have some good ones, right? So very enriching can be close family, close friends, a tight community, whatever. Second is meaning. And I think you were getting at this also earlier, Andy, in terms of sort of, trying to run a business, but try to do the right thing while you're doing it, right? Where meaning was very important to these older people. They didn't have to have cured cancer, right? It was just that their days mattered in some way that was important to them, right? That the world was even just slightly better off because they lived and existed in it, right? And this is why I think you see a lot of people who, if they retire, sadly, a fair amount of them kind of lose their source of meaning or purpose because they derived it from their job. And, we all know people that have kind of struggled in retirement to find happiness. So you want to make sure you have really tight relationships. You have meaning and purpose in your life in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't mean you have to work until you die, but you just need to be involved in doing things in the world that matter to you. And then the third is health, right? It's self-evident. You can't live to be 100 if you don't have good health. So I like to tell people that, money is important, and yes, we should shoot for all these goals that money can help us get to, but don't ever lose sight at the end of the day that the three things that really matter in life are those three things. So make sure you're carving out enough time in your week to be depositing your investments in those areas of your life. Are you spending enough time with the people you care about? Are you doing things with your work or with your free time that you feel, are making you a better person, the world a better place? And then are you investing in your health? And it's funny, if you can certainly find articles I've written online where I describe my own personal journey where until I was about 40, really until I kind of made the shift from the corporate treadmill to going out on my own, I was pretty overweight. And I was always athletic and active, but I told myself, look, my primary function as a father, as a husband, is to provide. And any time where I'm not working, I am stealing away from my family's financial future. And so I would use that to rationalize why I couldn't go to the gym as often as I would like to, for example. And then once I made the shift, when I really began realizing these keys to true wealth, I said, wow, A, health is what really matters, and B, if I don't take care of my health and then I kick off early or I get compromised early, I can't provide for my family. So actually working on my health is not a selfish act, it's an altruistic one for the people that I want to be able to provide for in my life. So to the specific question you asked, like what health practices do I think people should consider spending more focus on? I think this is pretty clear. And the good news is it's not rocket science. The things I'm about to mention, all of them are simple in concept. They might be difficult in practice when it comes to like being committed and having the discipline to just, stay with it. But the actual process of each is relatively straightforward. The first one is functional fitness. So, get out there and move. I was a big CrossFitter. I'm not recommending necessarily that everybody go do CrossFit, but CrossFit does a good job of basically borrowing a lot of the key functional movements in life that if you work on, it'll improve your strength, it'll improve your metabolic conditioning, it'll improve a lot of the stabilizing muscles that we just need for the things that we want to do in life. So if you just type functional fitness into Google, you'll get a zillion resources that can help you out there. The second one is nutrition. Nutrition is probably the least fun one for people, but actually it sadly matters the most. I would say back to the days of ancient Greece, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. What we eat has an incredible impact on our health. If you want to change the way your body looks, exercise is really important. But actually, if you're changing your composition, your diet's going to matter more than anything else. So get dialed in with good nutrition. Stress reduction, hugely important. It's something that we really ignore, in society. I think mental health is finally beginning to come into its own. But stress is corrosive. I think stress is a persisting chronic issue in much of society, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. And you can, get a mental health professional like someone like my wife, who's a therapist, can help you with that. But again, there's a lot of resources online, an increasing number of companies that offer mental health services around stress reduction that aren't that expensive going forward. Two last ones. One is mobility. As we get older, obviously our joints, if they're not well taken care of, begin to start failing us. This is why people need, knee replacements, hip replacements, stuff like that. If you work on maintaining your joints and mobility, you'll have much better quality of life throughout your life, but much more longer into your later years when it really matters, right? Where the difference in your joint mobility can mean after a fall, getting right back up and being fine, or being permanently downscaled in your mobility, having to use a cane, having to use a walker, having to use a wheelchair. And then the last one is sleep hygiene. Again, something that our society doesn't spend a lot of time focusing on, something that digital devices have just made exponentially worse, right? Because we're sitting there on the phone or the tablet, while we're lying there in bed, flushing our eyes with all sorts of stimuluses that get in the way of our diurnal cycles. So anyways, those are the big five.
Right. And, stress reduction is a big one. Richard Russell used to say he believed that was the cause of cancer. Now, I can't say that that's true, but he was a big advocate of doing all you can to find ways to alleviate stress. You mentioned your wife. We'll put her cell phone number down in the notes at the bottom, at the show notes at the bottom here for people to call. I couldn't agree with you more. And sleep is a tough one, man. In fact, for me, it's probably the toughest one out there. I have a very hard time shutting my brain off. And, I have found that taking a half a CBD gummy at night does help me sleep and shut my brain off. But I try hard. I subscribe to fitness. I will at the very least go on a 4 or 5 mile an hour, 4 or 5 mile walk every single day, listen to podcasts like yours and others to kind of let my, to be functional, to move. And often we'll do much more than that in terms of exercise, but I couldn't agree with that more. And I think the two tough ones here that people need to really work on are stress relief and sleep. I constantly yell at my wife, "Put your phone away." It's 1 a.m. What the heck are you doing? Go to bed. But sound advice and good advice and actually something that I try and deal with every single day. We kind of answered the next question I was going to ask you. So in the respect of your time, I just got 2 more for you. Sure. And I did want to shift gears just a little bit, Adam, because you're a very well-rounded guy with a really cool background and in many respects quite inspirational. One of the things that you talk a lot about, of course, is what's happening with the dollar, what's happening around the globe. geopolitically. And so we find ourselves in an environment of rising global debt, challenges to the dollar's dominance. We talk about that all the time. I do all the time with weaponization of the dollar and a country that is fiscally irresponsible. We're creating $1 trillion of debt roughly every 90 days. That's roughly $100,000 a second that we're doing 24/7 right now. On top of the issues in this country, the perception throughout the world of a compromised judicial system, of an electoral system that may or may not be fair, of an immigration system that has flaws, of lawlessness in our cities and wokeness and all of the things that seem to be deviations from what our culture and our principles were when you and I were kids.
Yeah.
I'm not making a statement on it at this point, but I'm just simply saying that that's not lost on the rest of the world. And my question to you is, in this environment, with challenges to the U.S. dollar's dominance and the moves like by the BRICS countries to diversify away from the dollar, and primarily through trading with one another in local currencies and in gold reserves, rather than tell everyone what they should do, what are you doing? What is your personal strategy to deal with this environment? As someone who I think I would argue is concerned every bit as much about, making money in as an entrepreneur and as a businessman, but more importantly, keeping it. What's Adam doing in this environment?
Well, the good news is I think what I'm doing is the same advice I would give people. And I would say, you listed a whole set of concerns, which I think are all real and valid. And I maybe next time I come on, we can dig more deeply into them because they deserve discussion.
Love to have you back on for sure.
And I would say just one note is, I'll tell you this, I worry less about like the dollar losing its reserve currency status. Will it at some point? Probably. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, next year, the year after. I acknowledge that, hey, I could be surprised, for sure. But I think that's a process that's going to take a long time. I would say my concerns around currencies are less driven by that specific fear and more driven about the debt that you were talking about earlier, right? Where I think that given the debt situation, the massive debt overhang that we have, and the global economy's addiction to it, and central planners' aversion to doing anything that might look like austerity, the decisions that are going to continue to get made from here will have one predictable outcome. I don't know exactly what policy choices are going to be made, but I can tell you I've got high confidence that the outcome is that it's going to diminish the purchasing power of our currency. And I'm talking about all currencies too. This is not a problem not unique to the U.S., right? So, I basically tell people from a wealth preservation standpoint, your number one goal is to stay ahead of the rate of purchasing power destruction. So, okay, how do you do that? First is, I think you do build your Armageddon stash, or which is, okay, I want to have some physical precious metals that are in my hot little hand. It's then time-honored money, for thousands of years. If we have some sort of currency crisis, whether it's US dollar only, whether it's around the world, whatever, if we wake up tomorrow and it's a different world, okay, I'm going to have more money than, even a couple ounces of gold will give you more true money than 99.9% of other people, right? So building that initial Armageddon stash, step number one. Step number two is to say, okay, look, I'm going to be building a financial portfolio. It'll have a lot of different assets in it, but I want to have a good chunk of hard assets in there as kind of ballast, which is, these are assets that have intrinsic value that can't be inflated away by a printing press, right? So no matter what else happens with the rest of my portfolio, this is the stuff that's hopefully going to keep me grounded, and at a minimum keep up with that currency devaluation pace. Third, I'd start working on multiple income streams, right? So I want to be able to have multiple streams of income, ideally income streams that inflation adjust. So think of something like, an investment property, right? You can raise your rents along with the pace of inflation, right? That's an inflation adjusting income stream. So build multiple streams of income so that if one gets compromised, you're not, dead in the water. And as inflation continues to rise, your income along with that is adjusting for that as it happens. Then third, you want to try to own some assets that will outpace the rate of inflation. And historically, stocks have actually been pretty good at this. So you want to have some stocks in your portfolio that can be, your jet fuel to try to beat that rate of inflation. Doesn't always happen, but historically, stocks have done pretty darn well. And then last, you also want to have under that same category of outgrowing inflation are businesses that you control directly. So Andy, this would be Miles Franklin for you, right? Stocks are great, but if you own a share in Google or Berkshire Hathaway or whatever, you have no control over what the executives running those companies do with that company. You want to have a company that's bringing in income that you've got the ability to grow faster than the rate of inflation, where you're the guy who's pulling the levers and can make all the strategic calls and hopefully if you've got a thesis about what's going to happen next, you can bet on that thesis through your company.
Yeah, I love that. Richard Russell always used to say income is the most important thing. And of course, he looked at gold and commodities not as investments, but as wealth. And in today's environment where you can start a company and sell things on Amazon, I think there are plenty of opportunities for people to be there, to be an entrepreneur, to be the steward of their own business. Last question for you, Adam, and again, kind of in the same vein. And again, I really do appreciate you coming on. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I appreciate all your candor and your insights.
Really enjoyed it.
Personally, especially. So looking ahead, if you could offer one key insight or piece of advice that would help people navigate the unpredictable future, and I know you kind of answered that, but one piece of parting advice. And then lastly, I try and ask people who come on the show, what do you hope that your work through Thoughtful Money and beyond and before, what mark do you want to leave on things with your stamp on it, and what can you do to continue to impact and guide individuals long after you're no longer doing this?
Okay. Maybe I'll start with the latter one first. That's why I'm building Thoughtful Money, and why I didn't call it, the Adam Taggart Show, is I want to build a financial education platform that will far outlast me. And in terms of the difference I'm trying to make in the world is, for me, the true return of what I do is when somebody sends me an email and says, wow, your program saved me. Before I found it, I really didn't know much about investing at all. I was just driven by the vagaries of fate when it came to my wealth. I've now started to learn about how money and markets actually work. I've taken control of my financial destiny, and I've actually paid off all my debt, or I've been able to save up enough now to buy that home I was looking for, or whatever. So to make positive changes in people's lives that they otherwise would not have been able to make without this information. And again, I fully plan to give the torch to somebody else at some time so that Thoughtful Money continues in the future, no matter what happens to me. In terms of my parting advice to people, it's nobody is an expert in everything, right? And I think this is one of the lessons of maturity, right? As you begin to realize that, like, okay, I'm good at some things, I'm not good at others. Let me find partners to complement me on the things I'm not very good at. So when it comes to your wealth, just like a company has a board of directors, right, that collectively their wisdom helps the company make better decisions, you need to build a team. You need to build a board of advisors. And I would say for most people, what I like to say is have everybody on the team play to their center of excellence. And that starts with you determining what your center of excellence is. And for most people, their center of excellence isn't being an excellent investor. Their center of excellence is, I'm great at whatever my job is, right? And so I'm going to focus on the income part of it, right? I can make the money, I can save the money, and I can invest it. But in terms of how it gets invested, that's not my center of excellence. And if that fits your profile, then I would say then, your job should not be determining the next best asset to put in your portfolio. It should be saying, who is the best, financial advisor that I should be working with given my goals, what I'm trying to do, and their area of expertise, right? So get yourself a great financial advisor, get yourself a great accountant, get yourself a great lawyer, get yourself, a great estate planner. Build this great team so that everybody is playing to their center of excellence, and you're going to benefit much more so than if you were just trying to figure each one of those components out on your own.
That's why I think people should check out your work, and I'm going to have you to rattle that off in a second. And of course, we will post links down below. I won't post your wife's cell phone number, but we will post links to your site. And when I think about what you're doing, I see a world. I work very closely with Sprott, and that's because I used to work with Rick when he was at Global Resource and then at Sprott. And I've worked very closely with those organizations. And fortunately, they send me their gold business. And on the other hand, I look at traditional financial advisors. And on one hand, you have traditional path. With the Sprott guys, you have a resource consultancy path. And there's never, I always have a hard time when people ask me, how do I find an advisor who offers a more holistic path? That seems to be what you're doing. And not only are you teaching financial literacy, you're helping people understand not only how to properly invest, but also how to properly look at the world in a more holistic sense, instead of being focused in one particular area, looking at how all of these things impact our future. So for people who want to learn more about what you're doing, whether it be in financial literacy or learn more about how to safeguard their money, how can they get in touch with you, find out what you're doing? What's the best way to follow you, Adam?
Just go to thoughtfulmoney.com. If you go there, you'll find our, recent interviews. So if you want to, watch the content, great. If you want to get connected with a financial advisor that thinks along the way that Andy does, that I do, that's a big thing that Thoughtful Money does, is it connects people with like-minded financial advisors. They offer a free consultation. So the key thing to underscore here is doesn't cost you anything. There's no commitment to work with these guys. It's just a public service they offer to try to help people make position as prudently as possible today for the things that might be coming down the road that Andy and I have talked about here. So you can fill out the short form there. It only takes you a couple of seconds. And then lastly, too, we have a free newsletter, which you can sign up for there. Lastly, too, just because you mentioned it, if anybody is interested in more of the emotional, stress reduction, healthy relationship side of things, you can go to thoughtfulmoney.com/relationships. And I actually have a deep dive interview on that topic too. So anyways, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, man, I can't thank you enough. It has been. And thank you for dropping in. We'd love to have you back on somewhere down the road. And I look forward to shaking your hand in person in a couple months in Vancouver. Until then, I hope you and everyone else stays well. It's going to be an interesting week ahead. So buckle up, everyone, and hope everyone stays well. So with that, we'll say goodbye. And thanks again, Adam.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.